Welcome, everybody. We are going to be working on Unit 5 today, and we're going to start with Chapter 5. And Chapter 5 focuses on the concept of web design. Um, and this is kind of interesting because, we're looking at a coding field, right? And so you're like, this isn't a design class, is it? But we're doing web, and web is a visual medium, so there's some design aspects we always have to think about as we're building a website. Here are the objectives for the class. I want you to see that a lot of this really kind of focuses on how we're going to present pages to the public, right? And what things we have to think about to do that. And it's important, right? I always like use the analogy of like, you don't build a house without a blueprint, and web pages really are kind of the same way. All right, so let's dig into this material a little bit. All right, so whenever you're building a website, you're doing it for a reason. Now, it could be, for example, a business website, or it could be a recreational website. And they kind of have examples of both things here, right? So the top left one shows this like beautiful graphic. The person's like outdoor, they're on the lake, they got their kayaks, and once again, here's the Wisconsin tie-in, you guys, right? So doorcounty.net, right? So, because that's where the author lives, is up there. And so you see a lot of Wisconsin references in your material, but it's kind of a thing, right? So I know that I've had a number of students this semester say, hey, I want to do a website about like, traveling or camping or national parks or, something like that. Totally great idea, right? Because there's lots of good materials. But look at what you're presenting there. So somebody that's kayaking, why do they do it? Well, they do it for physical, benefit. They do it for adventure. They do it for beauty, right? So what does the website look like? Well, the whole point is to entice people to kayak. So let's make it look beautiful. Look at the other website. Okay, so this is one. This is actually what the author's website looks like relative to this textbook. And I am going to make it a little bigger here just for a second. But there's no images. It's a lot of words. It's all about web design and best practices and software tutorials and learning objectives. And it's, let's face it, it's down to business, right? It's information. She doesn't need it to be beautiful. She needs it to be informational and functional, right? So two different audiences, two different looks, right? And if you're doing something for educational or business purposes, often your mindset is, I just need the information on the screen. I don't get those ads out of here, get the images out of here. I just put all that stuff on the screen so I can see it, right? So, and I think that's important. All right. The other thing is how do you organize a website? There's some of us will already have these preconceived notions, and you'll notice like when I build pages, I mean, there's certain commonalities and approaches that are common to all web pages. So often, and probably the most common form is a web page that's organized in a hierarchy. In other words, you have the home page, you go to the home page, right? And then you might have different menus, and then those menus might have sub items that are related to the top level menu. And so it's kind of like almost like an outline or a flow chart or something like that. It all fits into categories neatly. Other times you'll do a website that will be, okay, so here's the hierarchy, right? So this is really kind of not a atypical example where you have a home page. Then you have an about, a contact, and a products page, and the products page might have a couple different categories of products, widgets or I don't know, sprockets or whatever, right? But that's a good example of a hierarchy. When I do think of a hierarchy, though, I always think of it as like top level menu items, and I might actually, instead of putting home up top here, I might actually put it on the same level with about and contact, right? Because they're all like top level pages. But a hierarchy is a common thing, right? Hierarchies can be kind of done a couple different ways, and this is what these slides are about. So for example, you can go to a website where they have like 20 top level menu items. In fact, they have so many, they make them really small and they're maybe even hard to read. Or if there's really that much to look at, you could look at what we do on Blackboard. Blackboard's a really good example of a really busy website because we have top level menu items, and then they also have like these weird drop downs, and then they have the side menu, right? I mean, there's like so many navigation items here. There's no way they could put them all across the top. It would just not work. So when you look at like that hierarchy thing and you have maybe too many things across the top, what you often run into is the problem that you don't have enough space to put all that stuff up there, especially when you go to mobile. And remember, mobile is like 3/4 of our surfing or more, right? So not always a great idea. So there's actually like lots of thoughts that go with this, and if you do the readings, they talk about it. Another way to do the hierarchy thing is to maybe have less top menu items, and then you have all these sub menus, and then you can have a problem with that too, where the sub menus go too deep. Have you ever gone to like a menu that's got a drop down, and then that's got an expander, and then that's got an expander, and it's like, oh my God. And then like you move your mouse wrong and you lose it all, and you got to like figure your way back there. So that can be problematic also. It really kind of depends on the website. And I want you to look at the information on the slide because I think it's pretty important. It says, be careful that the organization is not too deep. This results in many clicks needed to get down to a page. So for example, if I wanted to get down here, right, to one of these, I'd have to click, 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 right? And I have this issue, real frankly, with Blackboard, right? So like, I try to coach other instructors, like, how do I set up my course shells, right? And so like, I try to coach them. And so I look at it like from a web perspective. And what I often do, almost all my courses are like this, I have a home page that takes you to any of the units of instruction, and all those units of instruction are on the sidebar too. So to get to any unit of instruction and everything inside that unit, it's one click. This is not an accident, right? You will have other courses from other instructors where you have to come over here and you're like, okay, well, this is the whatever module, and I click on the module, and then they got a folder, and then you go into the folder, then the assignments are in another folder. You see what I mean? And then the instructor will give me, oh, where's the assignment? You know, it's like, right, you're not finding it because there's so many clicks. My whole goal always has been one click to get to the unit, everything for that unit's right here. There's no subfolders. So everything is accessible, everything really, and almost everything in this course is like one click, maybe two, you know. But what happens is they kind of have this three click rule. Now, who developed this, I'm not really sure, but to get to some meaningful content on a website, the less clicks you have to get a person to that location, the better. Absolutely. Another way to organize websites is kind of like this PowerPoint. So I'll have you think about this for a second, right? And so a PowerPoint is what we call linear. So I'm just sequentially stepping through each slide, and usually sequentially stepping through the content on each slide. And sometimes there's websites that lend themselves well to this. I'll give you an example. Let's say I was like, had a recipe website, right? And somebody got to the recipe of like how I make lasagna. And I have a series of like, I don't know, 5 pages or 10 pages that show you how to make lasagna. They would make sense to go one after the other, that you don't want to jump right to step 4 without doing step 1 first, right? So a linear organization might actually be a useful one. And if you think of like kind of like the PowerPoint approach, tutorials, tours, or presentations are good. Recipes, step-by-steps. Another approach is what we call random. So there's not necessarily even a hierarchy that's created either file-wise or otherwise. And when I think of websites that are done like this, I think of ones that, you know, maybe seemingly have an organization, but really kind of don't. It's really all driven by a database and a search engine. So think about like a site like Amazon. Do you think they have like everything in like hierarchies and hierarchies of folders? No, folks, that's not how it works. They have so much complex stuff. It's all about what you type in the search and what the search results are. and then that pulls up the content, and that reads to random. Now, this can be used in a lot of different ways, frankly, and there's no necessarily right or wrong way to put a website together, because you can use any technique and have it work as long as it's well thought out. You know, it's kind of my line of thinking. When you do start to think about this stuff and you start to like actually make the pages look like something, and that's really kind of what they're doing on the next section here of slides, is there's certain types of things that we use to put things on a screen or put things on paper or put things on a product even, so that it's comfortable to look at. Have you ever gone to a website and gone, this is horrible, right? I have, right? Or have you ever gone to a site and go, wow, this is really cool, I really dig it. And I want you, next time that you have a reaction to a website, to take a really close look at it and try to figure out why you're having the reaction you're having. There are certain principles that designers follow, and if you ever study graphic arts, and I do get a bunch of web people that do study this stuff formally in like as a graphic artist, but there are techniques to graphic arts that you can follow it. Like, I mean, how does a graphic artist make something look good? They follow certain techniques. Some people know this innately, other people have to be taught, right? So like, for example, one thing that you do is you repeat visual elements. So like, for example, right? And you might not think of this as a visual element, but here in the center, they have, you know, they're talking about like the features of whatever this bed and breakfast is. And there's kind of like a repeating format. There's a title and a description, a title and a description. That's repetition, right? So I can tell that the little heading tells me what it's about, and then the words give me more detail. Okay, I get that. I can see it. I want you to notice too that the words, wherever there are words, there is contrast between whatever color the word is and the background so that you can see it, even when it's on top of an image. So like, for example, guided hikes is a light colored font over a darker colored background. That's the contrast, right? There's also the kind of contrast between like having images and words, having different colored backgrounds and text. All of those things kind of play. Then there's kind of like the proximity, like how you're grouping things together. And I'm going to also say like how you kind of organize or align the things to create interest. So for example, because you're kind of trying to sell this bed and breakfast and kind of being a beautiful location, notice they're not making like the picture of the bed and breakfast really huge. They're showing the beautiful landscape nearby, right? Because if we were looking at the place like as like the top banner, we might go, I don't know, maybe not. But you're like, hey, well, I don't care what it looks like. Look at that view, man. That's awesome, right? You also notice that they're putting stuff on the page that's important. So they're showing there's a beautiful view. There's a way to like set a reservation. They're giving me the information I need right off the bat. Oh, wow, they have guided hikes too. This is for me, right? And it's all like on the top part of the first page they're landing on. There's a wealth of information. And the goal is, once again, to get the people to come to the site, but then once they're there, to stay on the site and hopefully convert them into a customer or a client or a whatever, you know, whatever your goal is. There are a bunch of things to consider though when we start doing this. Accessibility has become really, really important. It always was, but you know, when computers first came out, they were like, all right, well, if you're blind, sorry, this is not a medium for you, right? That was just kind of the general attitude back in the old days. But now it's like, no, you're blind, that's okay, you can still use a computer because we have things called screen readers. And blind people surf the web, and deaf people surf the web, and disabled people and old people and people can like are colorblind and all these like have all these different kinds of issues can be on the web. And then, you know, we always think about like people flaws, but what about like, what if somebody just has an old computer, or God forbid still has dial-up internet, or just has bad internet because they live in the country, right? Those are accessibility issues too. And then the other one is, or they are using a mobile phone. And I want you to remember, mobile phones account for most of our surfing and really should be the primary medium we're designing for. There are guidelines here, and you see they have this thing called POUR, should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And some websites achieve this, and some they put a lot of money into making sure this is the case, and other websites horribly fail. For the future, though, I think it's become extremely important to kind of consider all audiences as you're building and to account for that. All right, so now you're building your pages, and one of the things you're going to run into when you're building your own stuff is you got to put words on the page, right? When you start putting words on the page, you got to actually have the words to put on the page. And this is one of the challenges that a lot of students come up with. So that whatever website project you come up with, let's say you're building a website for a video game. All right, well, maybe what you're trying to present is more visual, but eventually the words on the page are really important. A lot of really important kind of things to think about here. And what I typically do is I'll show like a website like this. So the BBC News website is a really good example that I use very often. And I want you to notice this is their homepage. You notice there is no full articles on their homepage, just titles and little abstracts that lead you to the full article. And then even when you get into the full article, right, I just want you to notice the format here. They'll still have like a blurb at the top. And then notice even their paragraphs. Sometimes their paragraphs are only a sentence or two. They don't have like, 50 sentences in one paragraph with no breaks, right? Why? Because it's hard to read. Also notice the words are narrow. Why? Because it's easier. Like once you get to the end of the line, your eye wants to go back and it can find its spot. If I had to go all the way over here and then come back, I might lose my spot. So that's one of the reasons why they do that. Not a lot of text in this article. I want you to notice that. Not a lot of text, but the information is important and on point, right? So that's kind of the point of the slide here. So avoid long blocks of text. Use bullet points, use headings and subheadings. Identify the stuff that you're showing, like that one sample page that we were looking at, they were talking about, I don't know, like the rooms or the hikes or whatever. So title, explanation, and follow a format. And all the stuff that we just talked about. Make it easy for the human eye to see it. The last thing the human eye really wants to look at is like 30 sentences in a row in one paragraph in a block. It's like, oh my God, you don't want to, like if you get an email like that from your friend, you don't want to read it, right? Or if they send you a text message like that, you probably don't even want to read that when it gets past like 2 sentences. So use that approach. So people that are on the web like little bits of information. If they really want to dig deep, well, you can provide that too, but to draw people in, small pieces of text. They also suggest here that you use kind of normal techniques for words. Okay, so what does that mean? Use normal fonts, right? Have you ever taken a class and you're like, oh wow, this font is really cool. I'm gonna do my whole paper like this and turn it in. Hopefully the teacher likes it as much as I do. And then your teacher, of course, goes, I don't ever want you to use a Comic Sans or script or whatever. Just use like Times Roman or Arial or just a normal looking font. So if you want people to really read it, use a normal font, use a normal size, right? Don't, whenever you start like doing like weird colors, weird fonts, whatever, you start to lose a certain percentage of people. If you really want people to read, use normal stuff. Strong contrast between the text and the background. So if you have a dark background like the behind what is the slide here, you don't want to put black text on top of that dark gray background. That's going to be really hard to read, right? White would look good, or just, hey, look at the PowerPoint slide here. Black text on top of white is super easy to read, by the way, right? That's why people use it. I mean, if you really are trying to either sell something or encourage somebody to like sign up for your website or whatever you're trying to encourage, why make it hard to read? What's the point of that? There's no point. The other thing, and this is kind of an interesting thing. Have you ever gone to a website where it's like, click here, right? To do what? I don't know, to sign up or whatever it is. That's considered really tacky, by the way. It's better to just show that it's a link and tell them what they're linking to. And it says hyperlink keywords or phrases, not entire sentences. Okay, so that is a good point. But if you look at the BBC website, I notice what they do, right? Is like if I want to go to this article, I can go to the title, but I can notice when I go to any part of the block here, I can go to the text and it still is a link, and this is a link, and the image is a link too. See how the link is activated? So that kind of breaks that rule a little bit. But the title being Russian block in flames as an aircraft crashes, that's pretty clear that that's a clickable thing. Because as I hover, it changes color and it underlines. Okay, and my pointer changes from an arrow to a finger. It's a link, people. Click. It doesn't have to say, click here for Russian Tower. So you get the point, right? So I think that's kind of a thing that comes with a little bit of practice, right? Okay, do I need to say any more, right? Right. So if you're one of those people that likes to abbreviate when you text, I get it. I do the same thing. But you know what? You're putting stuff out on the web. People will judge you. They go, "Oh, look how they spelled. They're idiots." All right, I'm not going to send them my money, right? If they can't even can't even run spell check, right? So check your spelling. Well, and here's the problem, right? If you're using Microsoft Word, it's got a spell checker. Check your coding engine. It does not, right? So here's what you do, is you take whatever words appear on a page, drop them into Microsoft Word or Google Docs or wherever, and then run the spell check and fix whatever is appropriate. Ideally, you never make any spelling mistakes, but you know what? Hey, we're all human. Big time, right? All right. The other thing we worry about when we're doing design is colors. Colors are really important because, hey, the web is a visual medium and we can use color, so why don't we? And we can use images and videos and motion and all these things. But what's I found particularly interesting about color is color's got a lot of aspects to it. And the first thing that's, you have to understand about colors is colors are based on the visual spectrum of light, which is electromagnetic frequencies that our eyes can perceive and apply meaning to. And I think this is really kind of bizarre. So light, in essence, is kind of no different than my voice or a radio signal. They're all electromagnetic frequencies that we are able to pick up. They're just different frequencies. Because they're frequencies, they can be mathematically described. And because they can be mathematically described, they also mathematically interrelate. And there's some rights and wrongs with colors. Anybody who's studied art formally, and maybe this is even in grade school, that you may have learned like the color wheel, right? And if I say primary colors, can anybody name, what are the primary colors?
Red, green, and blue.
Red, green, aha. All right. So Jamie, was that you that said that? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's absolutely correct for a screen. Now, this is really kind of interesting. But for like general color theory, it's actually red, blue, and yellow. Yeah, really weird. So, and then you'll notice that on the color wheel that there's blue, yellow, and red. And notice where they sit on the color wheel. They're like a perfect triad. There's 3 other colors in between each one of those that are a blend of the 2 colors. So like all the colors in between yellow and blue are a blend of, some shade of green. Closer it is to blue, the more aqua it is, the closer it gets to yellow, the more whatever it is. And the same is true with all these other color ranges. So in a print world, when we're printing to paper, it's red, yellow, blue. When we're working on a screen though, it's red, green, blue. For whatever reason, it worked out that way. It's a whole field of study. But there are what we call the primary colors. And then we have what we call secondary and tertiary colors. So for example, red, yellow, and blue are primary. The secondary colors are orange, green, and purple. The tertiary colors are all the other ones. And then they have names for the ones that go down from there. Now, color is infinite though, right? So, if you look at the sky when it's blue, it's like 100 shades of blue all at the same time. And depending on what part of the sky you're looking at and how clear it is and all that. And so all of that kind of falls into this. We were looking at this a little bit, right? And talking about like how colors work well together. There is this like weird Meyer Web tool, right? I'm not a huge fan of this one because it's kind of antiquated, right? But if you wish to work with that one, go for it. I always like the Adobe Kuler, Kuler, by the way. And the link for that is color.adobe.com. And I think I showed this a while back because they take all these different things they're showing on this slide, like the triad, monochromatic, complementary, et cetera, et cetera. And all you have to do is find like one primary color on the wheel that you like, and then you can switch to all the different modes and find all the colors that kind of fit that scheme really easily using a tool like that. So there's monochromatic.
You gotta watch out for the color mode at the bottom of that website though.
Yeah, right here, right. Yeah, so they do have all the hex codes for this. So for Jamie, you're right. So hex is still kind of considered primary, but depending on what your output mechanism is, for screen we're typically RGB, and that's why they have that here. But if you wanted, you could do the other approaches as well. My personal favorite, though, frankly, is working with RGB because it's easier than hex. But as far as how the colors work together with each other, why do people choose to use certain colors together? It's not by accident. They do follow these techniques. So you can do monochrome, analogous, complementary, split, triadic, tetradic, etc. And people will develop entire color palettes based on that stuff. It is highly subjective, though. There's no rule that says that this color must go with that one. But if you follow the principles of mathematics and you can plot it, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting because you can, plot it on like mathematical shapes, and all of this interrelates mathematically. The whole reason it's even on a website is because they can write computer code that does math, that explains it, and they can show it on the screen and come up with all the numbers. And I don't know, maybe you don't like this color scheme that's on here, but according to the triad approach, or maybe the complementary approach, these colors do work together. So, I mean, you wouldn't know that. Like if you were sitting there with color swatches at the paint store, you might never combine these colors together, if you know what I mean. And if you ever have like, I think of like my wife or my mom, like you get them to a paint store and they're looking at colors and they'll be there for hours and they take all the swatches home, and I'm like, oh my God, it's like, the truth is you only really need to pick one key color and the other colors will dictate themselves. And I think that's really kind of the magic sauce. So when you look at companies that have really cool color schemes, and where you apply that color, I mean, just like any product that's sitting in, like I have like this like vitamin water thing here in front of me, or this weird coffee cup, or drive by like a restaurant on the highway or whatever and look at their color scheme and why are they using those colors? It's for a reason. And then when you put it on a website, what colors are you featuring? So let me give you kind of an example here. And I'm not trying to just like push a bunch of Wisconsin companies here, but why not, right? So like Culver's, right? So a lot of us eat at Culver's. And what are Culver's colors? Do they have blue, right? And you might not pick up on what, like here it seems like they're going blue and white and then a light blue. Yeah, but generally speaking, this is what I think of as Culver's colors, as blue and yellow or blue and beige, right? And I always tell people, you go to like a Culver's, what are the employees wearing? They're wearing blue polo and khakis. There's your blue and beige, right? Look at the sign, it's blue and white. The building's usually blue and cream color. So they try to like put that into their whole thing. And I remember they did this burger last year, the curd burger, and there were people lining up, and usually about like 10 o'clock in the morning, they'd be sold out already. I guess this time they're going to have more. But I kind of point that out because you can find those colors on the color wheel and use it on the website to do things like headings, subheadings, borders, lists. You can use it with taste on the website. It doesn't mean you want the whole website to be those colors, but in key spots, very much so. Make sure that you have sufficient contrast. So there's a couple of websites here that can actually check the contrast of your website to make sure that you're following certain rules. I do not hold a lot of stock in this because I trust my own eyes, but some people will actually not let a site go out until they clear these. By the way, you can explore those on your own. And here's a whole bunch of resources you can use to build color. My favorite is the Adobe one. I am biased, whatever, but there's others, right? So you can go here, and there's tools out on the web that help you pick your colors. But kind of the grand point is this: what are you doing on your website? And look at the examples here. Here's a kid's site, really bright colors, almost obnoxious, I'd say, right? But it's for kids, whatever, right? Here's like a photography website. Well, you know what? I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of big graphics on it, and that's a great example. Or how about this? This is a gaming website. What do we get? Dark mode, grays, blacks, whites, right? And I'm a huge fan of that. I usually set my screens that way because it's more comfortable on my eyes. And then, yeah, I'm in that category now. Senior moments, right? White background, black text. If there's colors, it's only for accents. It's not really, the words aren't those colors. And why? Because it's easy to read, right? Now, you might not think that looks good, but then again, people who are seniors probably have more money to spend than people who are going to this website, right? And so you want to make sure that they're pulling out their credit card or whatever. All right, folks, we are going to take a short break. And then we're going to dig into the next section of this. All right, so 5-minute break. It's 1:01. We'll come back, let's say, at 1:06. All right, we're back from break, and we're going to continue on with our material here. The next slide here talks a little bit about how you use graphics and multimedia on a web page, and we've done a little bit of this talking already, but what we do notice is the moment you start using images, and then if you start to use audio or video in particular, it is really easy to have files that are way too big and therefore unkind to the data usage of your users, right? Like if you're on a home computer or on a school network like this, no big deal. Download, throw all the multimedia and graphics at me you want, I got no problem with it. The moment you're on your mobile and it's like ticking away at your data, then you got some issues, right? And you can lose people. They go, man, there's too many videos on the site. I'm almost out of data. I got to get out of here, right? So you've got to think about that. But they kind of have a whole list of different things here that they kind of go through. So we're going to go through these one at a time. So first thing is that they have a recommendation about graphics. Now, I'm going to say this is kind of a very loose recommendation. They have a recommendation here that 60K, meaning 60 kilobytes, is a good functional maximum for an image that you're putting on a web page. Now, sometimes it's not possible to get an image on the screen that is smaller than 60K, but I think we demonstrated last week with all the resizing and stuff that we did that it is possible to take something that's really, really big and make it much, much smaller. And I'm not going to say 60K is like what I use as a functional max. I think more like 200-300K is more practical. But you have to remember, if you have one page that has 10 of those images, all of a sudden somebody's downloading 3 megabytes. And if they're hitting that page over and over again, oh my God, there goes the data real quickly. And then remember that a lot of times when you're getting stuff on the screen for the web, the resolution's not as high, so you don't really need as high quality images. You might think, by the way, they say always use the the alt attribute, we demonstrated that too, because if your image doesn't load, then you can see some description. So I think that's pretty important. And then they have this tip here. If you're using images for navigation, provide text links at the bottom of the page. And this is more of an old school technique, but we used to do stuff where like if you look at Blackboard being an example here, because it's got like a left side menu or just a lot of menu items. In the old days, if we were making this navigation out of images, then we would, at the very bottom of the page, we would just have a list of all the links to all the pages down here in text. Why? Because if that image doesn't load in the sidebar, sometimes they don't load. You want to have people to have a way to navigate basically around your web page. All right, so some more design best practices. You know, there's no real functional limit to, it says the colors that you use on the web. And they're really kind of actually being more in particular saying web safe colors. I'm gonna say these days, almost all of our devices, phones, tablets, Chromebooks, computers, television sets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for the most part can display all the colors that are available that a graphics card can produce. So I don't worry about like what are color safe choices. I think more design choices are important than like what particular colors you're picking. There are a few colors, and I think we talked about this, that you might see on a Mac one way and on a PC a different way, and it's all about the color calibration. Now, if you are going to add text to an image, right? So this is not going on the page as text. It's created as part of an image, and you see this like most typically like on logos and banners and things like that. They talk about this thing called anti-alias. So look, wherever that logo was created, if you start to take it at one size and blow it up, what you get is this weird jaggedy effect. Have you guys ever seen that on a web page? Now, the reason that happens is because whenever you open up an image in a graphics editor, I'm going to bring up Photoshop here just to kind of demonstrate. The graphics that end up on a web page end up being what we call bitmap graphics, meaning they're tiny little squares of information. All right, and so I'm just going to pull up this JPEG here, because this is a photograph I took with my phone, Milwaukee Lakefront, if you're wondering, and it's a JPEG, and you know what? I'm not even looking at it at full resolution. I'm only at 1/3 the full view, and in fact, if I want to go to whatever the actual size of this is, I can do a right click, so 100%. So this is the actual size of the image, right? You notice it doesn't fit, right? I can't fit it all the way on my screen. I have to scroll like left and right, and it doesn't all fit. But the point is, if I could keep zooming in, and you see the image is actually made up of all these little squares. Each square is only one color, right? And so when we say a bit mapped image, each square is a bit, and each square is recorded as being only one color. And really what happens is we're creating an illusion of a smooth photograph, but it's really a collection of bits. But if you notice really carefully, whenever you had like an angled surface, like some of these poles and stuff, and you start seeing that jagged edge, because there's no way, if you're working with squares, to create a line on an angle and have it be smooth. It's impossible. So if you're going to take, the point is, if you're going to put words on a page that are part of an image, or even the image itself, and then you're zooming in on it, you're much more likely to see that pixelization. And there's a process called anti-aliasing, which helps to smooth things. Now, long story short, I mean, usually it's not good to zoom in on an image on a web page anyhow, because if you're seeing something like this, it just doesn't look good, right? So you compensate for that in advance. There are some modern ways to use what we call vector graphics on web pages, which are mathematical interpolations, but it's not very common, but it is possible for sure, right? So tips, use only images you really need, right? This is an efficiency thing. And you know what? Sometimes it's necessary to reuse images. So for example, if I have a logo in the banner of my website, why would I use a different image on each page? It doesn't make any sense, right? So if I use the same image over and over again, what happens with our browsers is the browsers will do what they call caching the image. They store it temporarily on your computer. And so when you're going to the next page, it's not re-downloading the image, it's pulling it up from the cache folder of your browser, which is already on your machine, and speeds up your browsing. So reusing images helps with that. The other thing that happens when you guys have discovered this is as you're making edits to web pages, sometimes you'll upload the stuff, especially with images and sometimes with words, and you put it on Prometheus, and then you hit refresh and it didn't change, but you knew you uploaded it, right? And that's when you do the Control-Shift refresh to make sure it really is loading up correctly. Now, interestingly, you know, they talk here about like the differences between connection speeds and how long it takes to download stuff. And real frankly, I think this is significantly less relevant than it used to be. I'm just kind of, you know, mopping up the size of the graphic here. But just to show you like where we're at, most of us, when we are on a mobile device or on a home network, we're operating at speeds that are significantly faster than this. So I'm using Spectrum at home right now, and I have not the first tier of service, but the second tier, whatever that is, like premium or plus or whatever they call it. And we get our down speed is 200 megabits per second. And if you look at here, this is 1.54. This would be a super slow, high-speed internet. And how long it takes, like if we're putting a 60K file on a web page, it takes with slow broadband 5.43 seconds to get that on the screen. That is not what it takes me at home, right? I'm almost 200 times faster, right? To kind of give you the perspective on this. But in the old days when we used to do dial-up, if I was on a good dial-up connection, and you would never get that full speed, you'd never get 56K when you did dial-up. In fact, I recollect if I was lucky if I could get like 45K on a connection. And 149 seconds for that 60 kilobyte image to load up on my screen. That's over 2 minutes. How long do you think that person's going to wait, right? So that's kind of the point they're making. Now, the reality is these slow speeds really don't affect us too much, but when you're on mobile and your signal's bad, or it drops from like 5G to 4G to 3G or 1X or whatever they call that, you can drop down to these speeds and it can get frustrating. Or if you're on a home network and you're sharing that connection like I do with my kids who are like, you know, my son will be like video gaming and watching videos at the same time. My daughter will be streaming music and chatting with her friends. My wife will be on YouTube and I'm teaching on Zoom all at the same time. Even with a really fast connection, you're still sharing that. So that can really have an impact, right? It doesn't matter how fast it is, how much of that bandwidth you're actually using. So I do find that you still need to watch that, but we do operate at speeds much higher than that now, for sure. All right. Here's another really important tip, you guys. When you are designing, and I would say I probably would update this slide, always test with more than one browser. So like the kind of stuff we're doing, I don't really worry about it too much. But if I was creating a real website for a customer, you know, hey, I own a Mac and I own a PC and I have Linux machines and I have tablets and I have Chromebooks and I have my phone, yada, yada, yada. And I'm going to test that web page on all the different browsers, on all the different platforms. Because that's what I do as a web designer, because I don't want, like my customer is an Apple person and I'm a PC person, they pull it up on their Apple and it looks like hell. And I'm not going to pay you because it looks like hell. Didn't you test it for the Apple? I mean, come on, you know? And so it becomes really important, not that you have to go out and buy multiple computers, but at the very least, you should have multiple browsers. So the big browsers are what on our systems? Well, they say Internet Explorer here, but now for Microsoft, the primary browser is Edge, okay? And so here's Edge. Interestingly, Edge is built on the Chrome code base. So if I open up, you know, Chrome, okay, so I might have a little bit different look, but it's going to render the pages almost exactly the same. Then, of course, there's the Firefox browser. Firefox does use a different code base, and of course, I run into this problem every time here. This is open on my second screen, and I'm not sure how to, there we go, there's Firefox. And Firefox does use its own code base and has some kind of unique features that are different than Chrome. Then there's the Safari browser, which I can't demonstrate on this platform, but anybody who's on an Apple, that's your primary browser like Edge is for a PC. But those aren't the only browsers out there, right? In fact, there's many, 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 many others, but there's some of note that you might want to consider testing. I would say at a functional minimum, you should have Edge, Firefox, and Chrome installed in the machine. Those three browsers are the primary one and probably account for like 99% of all browsing traffic. Another really important browser, I do not think I have it installed on my system though, is one called Opera, right? So if you go to, all right, so I was do the cookie thing, but Opera is kind of an interesting browser. Some of you may already use this, but it's always been one of these browsers that always had a really small market share. But for as weird as they kind of are as a browser, they also came up with some really important inventions in browsing. The probably the most notable one is tabs, right? You guys remember like browsers before tabs? Probably not, but Opera was the one that invented those. They were also one of the first to have a view code menu, which I thought was interesting. They have a real loyal following. It is pretty popular on mobile, more popular on mobile than it is on personal computers, but it has a very strong fan base. So Opera is one of those browsers you might want to consider. Another one that I've been using quite a bit lately that I like for a lot of reasons is one called Brave. So this is the Brave browser. And you know what? I'm just going to open a new tab. So this is kind of like the default look for Brave. And Brave is one of these that I like for this reason. It's built on top of Chrome, right? So it has a Chrome code base, but it has all the privacy features built in, most notably ad blockers, pop-up blockers, tracker blockers, privacy screeners, and all these things. And anytime I go to like a web page, and I'm going to do this on purpose here. Yes, I'm logging in. I don't know if I should log into Facebook. Maybe that's not a good one to go to. Maybe we can just go to something like Amazon.com, for example. But as you go to a site like this, what it'll do up here is it'll show you how many trackers and things it blocked when it goes to a website. So their thinking is kind of like multifold. The one thing is, every time you go to a website and they're tracking you, or they put up pop-up ads and stuff, you're wasting more of your data. But so why do you need to look at that stuff on your screen, right? Or how about like you go to YouTube to watch a video and then the ads pop up? A browser like this filters that, by the way. So that's kind of appealing. But there's also ways with this where you can take and this is really kind of an odd scheme, mind you, that you can opt in to the advertising. I want you to think about that for a second. You can opt in to look at the ads, and then you start earning cryptocurrency to look at ads that you can spend online to buy other things. Yeah, it's kind of a weird approach. But it's kind of a thing of the future, I think. But the Brave browser is one that I really like. I say that to people that the Brave browser is a browser for people in the know. You know, like IT people tend to be the ones using the Brave browser. But if you're really concerned about privacy, that's a really good one to use. And then you don't, like if you're a person who gets like ad blockers and whatever, and you put it into Chrome, you don't have to do that with Brave. It comes that way. So highly recommended product, by the way. All right. But at the very least, you should have Edge, Chrome, and Firefox on your machine. If you're on an Apple platform, you throw Safari into the mix also. Well, all of those are important. We start to look at the design of a page, and we look at these real common kind of techniques for building websites. It is not unusual, like the screenshot that you see here of this kayak website, to have some sort of a banner or logo at the top, and then horizontally, some sort of navigation or top menu navigation, maybe with drop downs, maybe without. And then other things you can help to enhance navigation are things such as breadcrumbs. And breadcrumbs, you see this little part of the slide here. Once again, I'm going to make this bigger so it's just easier to see, where it says home, tours, half-day tours, right? We call that a breadcrumb, and usually these are also links. So if I'm on the half-day tour page and I want to go back to the tour page, I can just click here. Those are called breadcrumbs, by the way. There's a bunch of different ways to do these things. The author is big on enforcing the skip to content hyperlink, which is an accessibility thing. Depending on the kind of website that you build, that might be pertinent for you, by the way. All right, let's get to this part of the presentation because this becomes important for one of our assignments. Okay, so you'll see on the website or on Blackboard here, and I gotta make sure I'm looking at the, too many browsers, too many windows. Pretty normal actually for a class like this. But if you go back to the course shell, you'll notice this site design assignment. And this site design assignment is basically going to have you first pick which project you're going to work on. Like you may have given me a list of 3 or 4 or 2 or whatever, but you need to pick one. Then I want a verbal description of the project, including like what you hope to name it. Okay. Then we want to create a sitemap and a wireframe. Now the sitemap is the thing where we showed like kind of like the menu hierarchy, right? So I'll show you how to do that. And then we're also going to create a wireframe. So the question is, what is a wireframe? Well, a wireframe is kind of like the rough sketch or blueprint for how you're building the site. This can be a pixel perfect kind of thing, or it can be kind of a generalization. And I think of it more as a generalization. So like I could go to somebody and say, okay, so this is what I'm thinking of building. Like I'm gonna put your header, your logo up here, then I'm gonna have your menu there, and then we're gonna put a picture in the middle, and we're gonna have the sidebar here, and you know, it basically is just showing you where the stuff is gonna go on the page. Now, notice how all the images are all the same images, and all the headings just say heading or subheading. They don't really say what they're gonna say, but the point is that you have a general look of what you're shooting for the website, you know? And the one that we're looking at here is a pretty normal kind of layout. You know, you got a header section, navigation, a content area, a footer. The main section looks like it's split into 3 columns. Mix of words and graphics, you know, so you kind of have the general look. All your pages might look exactly like that. Or maybe this is the look of the home page, and then when I click on services and I go to that page, that'll have a different look. But the navigation and the header and the footer will all be the same. So what a wireframe is to show the general look of your website and what you're shooting for in advance. Wireframes can be really basic, you know, so here's an example of something a little more basic, right? So same thing, header, navigation, and footer, main content area, but doesn't have a 3-column approach. And they're making a point, this is usable, but a little boring, right? So how do you make it a little more interesting? You know, one answer is graphics. The other answer is how you're putting the content on the page. Notice the words here are in columns for a reason. Same reason like newspaper websites do it, because it's easier to read something that's narrow than something that's wide. And I'm not sure if you agree, but that is kind of boring. This is a little more visually interesting, although not that much different. Same content. And that was really kind of the point. Now you can kind of keep ramping that up, and some of it becomes, you know, very subjective, you know. So in the old days when we first started doing, you know, web design, we almost always, and I think this is fascinating, would use a left side menu for web pages. And then eventually we kind of transitioned to, it's more common to see menus at the top. But the reality is there's lots of websites now that do both, left and top at the same time. Just depends on how many links you have. But the whole point is that whatever approach you use, there's no right or wrong, that you just want to be consistent with it and get a look going. And you know what? If you're trying to like think of a look for a website, it's easier to do a wireframe to test what it looks like than write the code, hope you get it right, and it kind of looks like that. And then you go, God, I hate it. So the whole point, what's the point of wireframing? That you kind of draw it out first to see if you like it. Yeah, and you know what, folks? That's a whole career path, by the way, in IT. And it's called user interface design. When you get to the capstone for this program, the very last course where we build real websites for real clients, we spend a bit of time talking about this stuff. It becomes really, really important. Right. Notice they have a couple different things here. So they're talking here about layouts. Old days, very often it was common, like if we had like a narrowed up website, that people would shift it over to the left and then somebody figured out it looks better in the center, right? Yeah, so that's kind of the point to that one. There's also this kind of big debate that happens. Do you use the whole width of the screen on a big wide screen, or do you narrow it up? And then you notice kind of like what a lot of people are doing is they'll have the content area of the page narrowed up, but the header will go all the way across. And then when it drops down to mobile size, it'll actually, squeeze on the screen a different way. Right? The ideal, of course, is that you squeeze it on the screen in a way that doesn't lose the integrity of the content or the look or the feel, right? Without actually even changing the code. But there are 3 different ways to do mobile site. You can have a completely separate site. So you can have some code on your site that checks to say, hey, is this a phone? All right, here's the phone site. That's not a popular approach anymore. It used to be. So completely separate mobile site was one way. Or what is the more proper way, I would say these days, is that you set up your site to be responsive. And this is where I go back to like these examples like I was doing. Responsive website would be like the Boston Globe. Of course, they were the first ones that ever did it, right? But here's their full page website. And then as you come out of full screen resolution and start to narrow up, they have their page respond automatically, which is called responsive design. And basically you have everything from this width, so this is phone, that would be tablet, small computer screen, and then large computer screen, right? Without redrawing the page, right? It's all already coded onto the page. That's considered to be the modern, more appropriate way to do it. I'm going to tell you though, real frankly, it can be a challenge to have that work like that. If you make smart choices up front, sometimes it's not as hard, honestly. All right, so what do you worry about with mobile? Well, small screens, right? And the fact that on a computer screen, think about this, we look at things wide, not tall. Then we go to our phone and now we're tall, not wide. I think one thing that's real fascinating is how on a Mac platform, like if you open a browser and by default, right, and I'm just kind of trying to demonstrate, like if I would open up a browser window on my Mac and I've never touched this Mac before, it would open up the window and it would kind of look like this. They would always had this approach in Safari of taller rather than wide on the screen, right? Because that's what a page looks like, right? So I think it's really kind of interesting that we have that issue with phones where we're thinking about it's tall rather than wide. And even when it's wide, it's not as wide as a regular computer screen. Not that we don't have phones that have high resolution, but that, how much can a person effectively see at that resolution? Have you ever looked at a web page on your phone that looked so tiny there was no way you can make anything out and you had to zoom in? Because that person didn't think about making it for a phone, right? So they're losing a lot of traffic. Yeah, so on a phone, a single column layout is best. On a widescreen, hey, columns are great, right? Lots of contrast on a phone too, because you can't count on people's batteries being good and the screen being bright. So contrast really helps. You also want to optimize images for mobile, even to the extent of having different images for the mobile views than you have for this widescreen views. So it takes a little bit of engineering. Yeah, and is there content on the page that doesn't need to be displayed? Did you guys notice on the Boston Globe site when we were full screen, there was ads all over the place, but then when we got down to mobile, there were no ads at the top. Yeah, not that they don't have ads, but that's not what they're pushing first, right? So, so this is actually kind of an interesting article to read. They have here. There's a lot of different ways to accomplish responsive web design, real frankly. One is through a process called media queries, and that's what the bottom link is. And media queries basically probe the width of your screen and then adjust the content, or adjust the CSS to redisplay the content in a way that works for that format. So it checks your screen width and then adjusts. There are other techniques, so we have some different like grid systems that we can use. We have things called flex boxes and flex layouts, and a lot of those attempt to address this. One real common like theme that people use for responsive design is this theme that's built into a lot of our coding engines called Bootstrap. You guys may have heard of it if you've done coding before, that automatically does some of those adjustments for you. Right, that does get to be a pretty deep topic. Here we are just scratching the surface of it, but at some point we will have a little bit of media queries that we'll do in this class. And then I do have an optional assignment where you can do flex boxes for this class as well. Now, the author of our book does have kind of like a best practices checklist, and if you want, you can actually go to the site. So let's just do her the solid of doing that. So you can see that comes from our book. But she has kind of like a checklist here. Notice how they're like boxes, right? So if you're really like, I don't know, did I think of everything from my website? This is a spot where you could come and go down the list and go, well, yeah, I did that. No, I didn't do that. Maybe I should look at this. Right? So this is kind of a helpful list. Is it appealing to your target audience? So she does it like a pretty fundamental kind of check. So not a bad list to work from, honestly. As you become more experienced doing web design, you will notice that a lot of that stuff becomes a little bit more intuitive for you, and you kind of internalize it at some point. All right. Now she goes kind of through, and this is, this basically the slideshow is basically done, but she goes through, and now here is her checklist one by one. I'm not going to go through all the stuff. You guys can read this because we basically covered all of this in the presentation, but here it is on the screen if you want to see it all. Same stuff that was on her webpage. Some of it is real common sense stuff, and I stop on this slide, for example, like if you have a page that's got 20 sites and 20 pages, and each one of those pages has 20 links, should you test all the links? Well, duh, of course you would, right? You would test every link on every web page and make sure it works correctly. Otherwise, you'd run the risk of putting it out on the web and somebody goes, hey, I tried to click on your thing and I couldn't get to it, right? So you have to test every link, just for an example. I think some of that is kind of common sense, but a lot of it really is kind of fundamental as well. So folks, that is chapter 5. So I'm going to stop this recording here. And you notice the big thing that we had here is doing wireframes. Now I am going to do, kind of as part of the next video that I do, stuff on how to create wireframes. So that will be in the next video.